The daughter I cherished stood silently while her boyfriend kicked me out of my own home in the rain, and then she came back to me in tears once she finally saw what a terrible man he really was. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." Isabella's sobs were cut short by the cruel slam of the oak door closing. I stood alone in the rain, staring at the door that had just swallowed my daughter. Right at the tip of my shoe, my late husband's leather-bound diary lay, beginning to soak up the cold droplets. It had all happened just minutes before. I had arrived after receiving a legal notice that morning. It was Marco who answered the door, his voice smooth and condescending. "Ilara, I trust you received the notice," he said, his hand resting on Isabella's shoulder like a claim of ownership. "Temporary possession of this house has been transferred." I didn't answer him. I just looked at my daughter. "Isabella," I said her name. "Look at me." She looked up, her eyes welling with tears, her lips trembling. She couldn't utter a single word. Her guilty silence seemed to make Marco impatient. "Clear this out," he ordered his bodyguard. Box after box of my belongings was placed on the lawn, right in the middle of the rain. It was a cold, methodical act. I stood motionless, watching parts of my life being pushed outside. Isabella turned her face away. I could see her shoulders shaking. Then, the bodyguard dropped an old wooden chest. The lid flew open. Its contents spilled out. A few old photographs, a shawl, and Lorenzo's diary. It rolled out and stopped right at the edge of the top step. Isabella instinctively bent down to pick it up. "Give it to me, Isabella," Marco said, his voice losing its calm for the first time. She froze. She looked at the diary in her hand, then at me. Her eyes were filled with panic. "Isabella!" Marco's voice was a sharp command. She flinched and dropped the diary, but it didn't fall at her feet. It fell towards me, sliding down the steps. It looked like an accident, but I knew it wasn't. Immediately after, she burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." "Get inside!" Marco roared, hauling her into the house, and then the door slammed shut. Now, I stood alone in the rain, looking down at the diary. I slowly bent down, picked it up, and pressed it to my chest. It wasn't just a memento. It was a message, a weapon that my own daughter had just given me. The game had changed. This was no longer my fight alone. I stood there for a long time, listening only to the falling rain. The diary in my hand grew cold. I heard the roar of a car engine start up and then fade away. Marco was gone. He was always the first to leave after the dirty work was done. That meant Isabella was alone in that house, with her guilt. My mind began to piece everything together. The legal notice he had brandished, my daughter's silence, and finally, this diary. It all fit. I turned my back on the house. I didn't look back again. I knew I couldn't just stand here. I had to go, to act, right now. I walked through the familiar streets, heading towards the town square. I needed to get to Sophia. She would know what to do. On the way, a plan began to form in my mind, clear and coherent. First, I would go to Sophia's. Then, we would examine Lorenzo's diary closely. I remembered the missed call from last night, a number from Florence which came right after the news of the sale was announced. It couldn't be a coincidence. Lorenzo had written in his diary, "Find Albinati. Only he will understand." So, the next step would be Florence. I pushed open the door of the cafe. The familiar sound of the wind chime greeted me. Sophia was behind the counter. She looked up, her eyes full of worry. She didn't ask a single question. She just opened her arms, and I knew I had come to the right place. I clutched the diary tightly. This was no longer my fight alone, and thanks to Isabella, I now had my first move. I pushed open the glass door of La Lanterna Cafe. The familiar chime of the bell rang out. Sophia, my best friend, was behind the counter. The moment she saw me, she slammed a cup down, making a sharp clack. She didn't ask a single question. Her eyes said it all. "Come on," she said, her voice decisive. "Upstairs. We need a plan." In Sophia's cozy attic room, in front of a crackling fire, I was finally able to examine the diary properly. I knew it was important, and I knew exactly why. It had all started a few weeks ago, when Marco first brought an art expert to the house. He told Isabella that the antique painting in the attic, something my family had owned along with the house for centuries, could be of great value. Lorenzo, my husband, had spent years researching it. He believed it was not just a piece of art, but an inseparable part of the house's legal heritage, almost like an encrypted deed of ownership. He had recorded all his research in this diary. That day, I had accidentally overheard Marco's conversation with the expert. He wasn't just asking about monetary value. He kept asking, "Are there any accompanying documents? Any original certificates or provenance papers?" I knew immediately what he was looking for. He didn't just want to sell the painting. He wanted to find the original certificate to fully legitimize the sale, perhaps to multiply its value, or to completely sever its historical connection to the house and my family. He wanted to turn a legacy into a mere commodity. And Lorenzo's diary was that very thing. It contained the entire history, analysis, and secrets of the painting. That was why they threw me out. They couldn't find the diary after days of searching. They believed I was hiding it. Forcing me out of the house was so they could have the space to themselves, to freely search every nook and cranny for that treasure. They could never have guessed that the very thing they were looking for was in the old suitcase they had contemptuously thrown out, right at my feet. Their arrogance had blinded them. Now, under the warm lamplight, I read every word carefully. I turned to the last pages, where Lorenzo's handwriting became more urgent. And then, I found it. A detailed sketch of a silver falcon symbol, noted as found on the painting. Beside it was a scribbled note. Albinati, Florence. Only he will understand. Professor Albinati, a brilliant scholar, an old friend of Lorenzo's. Everything began to make sense. "Here," I said to Sophia, my voice filled with hope. "This is our next step." The train to Florence left early the next morning. Sophia insisted on coming with me. From the moment we were at the station, I felt a sense of unease. I saw a figure in a dark coat pass us twice. Marco hadn't found the diary in the house. He must have realized his mistake and sent someone to follow me. As the train sped through the Tuscan countryside, the man appeared. He pretended to stumble, and in that instant, his hand shot out for my bag. The struggle was fierce. He pulled hard. "Let go!" I shouted. Sophia, with an angry cry, swung her umbrella. But he was ready. He spun, shoving Sophia hard and sending her stumbling into the seats. At the same moment, he gave one final, violent tug. The diary flew out of the nearly torn bag and fell to the floor. He bent down to grab it, but just then, a ticket inspector entered the carriage. The man froze, shot us a look of pure venom, and then quickly disappeared. I scrambled to pick up the diary, a long scratch on my hand. Sophia slowly got up, her arm bruised. We had kept it, but I knew Marco would not stop. Professor Albinati's office in Florence was a miniature library. He was an erudite old man, but his eyes held a look of weariness and skepticism as he listened to my story. "Mrs. Ilara, Lorenzo was a good friend, but—" he hesitated. Sometimes his imagination ran away with him. I had anticipated this. I leaned forward. "Professor, I remember Lorenzo once told me about an afternoon where you both argued for 3 hours about the meaning of the dove in the Annunciation fresco in Siena. That afternoon, you two finished an entire bottle of 1,985 Chianti Classico Reserva." Professor Albinati froze. A rare smile touched his lips. "And he finally admitted I was right," he said softly. His expression softened, but the skepticism remained. "Memories are one thing, madam, but staking my reputation on an unproven theory is another. He took the diary, flipping through it expertly. He stopped at the page with the drawing of the silver falcon. "Interesting," he murmured. "This sketch. It is very similar to the codification style of certain Renaissance families." He stood up, making no promises, only saying, "Let me check my archives." He walked to a bookshelf, using a small wooden ladder to retrieve a thick, leather-bound volume. He put on a pair of white gloves, carefully turning the old pages, using a magnifying glass to examine the small annotations. Time passed in silence. Finally, he stopped at a page. He didn't cry out in victory. He just stared at the page for a long time. Then he looked up at me, his eyes now filled with a grave seriousness. Professor Albinati pushed the book towards me. On the yellowed page, a short passage described the asset codification style of the Orsini family. And next to it, a small drawing, an emblem that looked like a bird in flight, its details faded by time. It wasn't an exact match to Lorenzo's sketch, but the resemblance was undeniable. "I cannot be 100% certain just yet," Professor Albinati said, his voice low. "But if this is indeed the silver falcon of the Orsini family, as Lorenzo suspected, then, madam, you and I have a great deal of work to do." I looked at him, waiting for an explanation. Sophia leaned forward, tense. Professor Albinati pointed to the text. "Read this carefully," he said. "The Orsini family weren't just collectors. They were bankers, politicians. They needed a way to authenticate their most important assets without conventional paperwork." He continued, his voice filled with scholarly authority. "This silver falcon symbol, according to the records, was a form of perpetual authentication. It declared that the artwork could not be bought or sold in the usual manner. It could only be passed down to a direct heir, one who could prove their connection through familial knowledge." My mind lit up. I looked down at the diary in my hands. "This diary," I whispered. "Precisely," Professor Albinati nodded. "Lorenzo's diary, with his detailed research, is that familial knowledge. It is the proof that your family are the rightful heirs. Any sale conducted without this consensus would be legally void." Now I understood. It wasn't simply about who found the painting first. It was about who held the key to unlock its true value. Isabella and Marco had sold a locked box for which they had no key. "Then," I said, my voice now firm, "we must prove it." "Indeed," said Professor Albinati, "and we will start by requesting a technical examination at the auction house itself." 2 weeks later, we sat in a luxurious meeting room in Milan. In the preceding time, we hadn't drafted a complete report to send ahead. Instead, we focused on a single hypothesis, a single request. Professor Albinati had used his reputation to demand this meeting on the grounds of needing to verify a minor technical detail regarding the artwork's primer layer before finalizing the file. It was a professional procedure they couldn't refuse. The antique painting hung ceremoniously at one end of the room. Isabella and Marco sat at one side of the table, flanked by a lawyer. My daughter tried to maintain a cold expression, but I saw her hand continuously twisting the ring on her finger. Marco, on the other hand, was completely confident, giving us a condescending nod. I, Sophia, and Professor Albinati sat on the opposite side. The auction house representative sat at the head of the table, his expression neutral but wary. After the introductions, the representative spoke. "Professor Albinati, we have received your request. Please specify the technical detail you wish to verify." Professor Albinati cleared his throat. "Sir, in researching works from the same period, we have found that this particular artist sometimes used a special primer containing phosphorus, detectable only under ultraviolet light. It is a minor detail, but one that could affect the subsequent insurance valuation. We simply wish to confirm its presence." It was a perfect excuse, reasonable and unrelated to ownership. Marco looked more relaxed. Of course, the representative said and gave a signal. A technician entered with an ultraviolet lamp. Wait a minute, Marco suddenly interjected, his voice sharp. Subjecting a rare work like this to ultraviolet radiation requires the consent of the current owner. We do not approve of any experiments that were not announced beforehand. He was trying to block us, using a legal shield. Professor Albinati,